are these people?
So do you know about David McBride, Care Bear?
Yes, you've read his articles before.
Yes, once or twice, but I don't think we've showcased his original thing. But I definitely had John Pilger before. And he's here writing for Consortium News. He writes, "We are Spartacus. There can't be democracy in colonial war. One aspires to decency, the other to fascism. Meanwhile, once welcome mavericks are heretics now in an underground of journalism and a landscape of mendacious conformity." John Pilger making sure you know he's got a dictionary. Okay? But anyway, in case people haven't seen this scene, right? This is Spartacus, right? But this guy is also Spartacus, and this guy, and this guy, and these two. They're all Spartacus. There's some historical context we'll get to, but anything you want to say before we get started?
I am Spartacus.
I am Spartacus. You've watched the film, yes? Hopefully people in chat have watched this film. If not, you should. Yeah. This is one of those, like, film school 101. We got to go back and watch this and Ben-Hur. Throw Gone with the Wind at the end of it, just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
So, this film was made, like, 1960s, right? Remember what else was happening during the 60s? Yes, Care Bear? You know how this works? We get a particular guy come up by the name of McCarthy. You remember him, right? So Spartacus, 1960 Hollywood film based on a book written secretly by the blacklisted novelist Howard Fast and adapted by the screenplay writer Dalton Trumbo, one of the Hollywood 10 who were banned for their un-American politics. It is a parable of resistance and heroism that speaks unreservedly to our own times. This is Spartacus, King of the Slaves, Care Bear. Who rebelled against Rome and fucking kicked some ass. All right? Like, okay? They were really upset at this ex-gladiator doing the business. Okay?
Right.
Both writers were communists and victims of Senator Joseph McCarthy, chairman of the GOC, the Government Operations Committee, and its permanent subcommittee on investigations of the U.S. Senate, which, during the Cold War, destroyed the careers and offered the lives of those principled and courageous enough to stand up to a homegrown fascism here in the US of A. So, this is a sharp time, now a precise time. Arthur Miller, The Crucible, you watch that too, K-Bear? He's going through his whole film 101 school here, John Pilger. If not, you should. Crucible's good. But we live no longer in the dusky afternoon where evil mixed itself with good and befuddled the world. There is one precise provocateur now. It is clear to see for those who want to see it and foretell its actions. It is a gang of states led by the United States whose stated objective is full spectrum dominance. Russia is still the hated one, Red China, the feared one. Just in case you didn't know the field yet. From Washington and London, the virulence has no limit. Israel, the colonial anachronism and unleashed attack dog, is armed to the teeth and granted historical impunity, so that we, the West, ensure the blood and tears never dry in Palestine. That's kind of we just talked about this in the last segment. British MPs who dare call for a ceasefire in Gaza are banished. The iron door of two-party politics closed to them by a labor leader who would withhold water and food from the children.
Right.
McCarthy's... Yes, please.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about like Schumer and who else? Hakeem Jeffries showed up at the march yesterday, and basically being like, we stand with Israel, and the idea that people were shouting no ceasefire, no ceasefire.
Not to mention, in the UK, he's talking about labor leaders, especially when they're still calling Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite. They've asked him to
Right.
condemn Hamas. They've done all the terrible shit that they normally do. Meanwhile, what's Tony Blair doing? Meanwhile, the guy we know actively committed war crimes, that guy, and was complicit in Bush. Like it was the UK who convicted him of that. Actually, they gave him a slap on the wrist and let him go.
Yep.
So, in case people aren't paying attention over there either. So, in McCarthy's time, there were bolt holes of truth. Mavericks welcomed then as are heretics now. An underground of journalism exists, such as this site, IE Consortium. In a landscape of mendacious conformity, dissenting journalists have been defenestrated from the mainstream. As the great editor David Bowman wrote, the media's task is to invert the truth and support the illusions of democracy, including free press. Okay? By the way, John, you are definitely getting use out of that dictionary, bro. You're pulling some words out. I'm just saying, who'll be using defenestrated? You know anyone that be like, man, that whole day was really defenestrated the other day? Nobody. Come on. Anyway, I love you. You're an educated man. I get it. Social democracy. Do what? Yeah, like you've been to college. Social democracy has shrunk to the width of a cigarette paper that separates the principal policies of major parties. Their one subscription is to a capitalist cult, neoliberalism, and an imposed poverty described by a UN Special Rapporteur as the immiseration of the significant part of the British population. War today is an unmoving shadow. Forever, imperial wars are designated normal. Iraq, the model is destroyed at a cost of 1 million lives and 3 million dispossessed. The destroyer Blair is personally enriched and fawned over at his party's conference as an electoral winner. Blair and his moral counter, Julian Assange, live 14 miles apart, one in a Regency mansion, the other in a cell, awaiting extradition to hell. According to a Brown University study, since 9/11, almost 6 million men, women, and children have been killed by America and its acolytes in the global war on terror. A monument is to be built in Washington in celebration of this mass murder. We covered this, yes, Care Bear? You remember this? Collin sometimes wonders why I bring stories, and then weeks later, things come up again. It's committee. I'm still waiting for, River of Butter to pay off, but it will. So its committee is chaired by the former president, George W. Blair's mentor, Afghanistan, where it started, was finally laid to waste when President Biden stole its national bank reserves. We needed them for Ukraine, Collin. Now they're in Israel. There have been many Afghanistans. The forensic William Blum devoted himself to making sense of a state terrorism that seldom spoke its name and so requires repetition. In my lifetime, the United States has overthrown or attempted to overthrow more than 50 governments, most democracies. It has interfered in democratic elections in 30 countries. It has dropped bombs on the people of 30 countries, most of them poor and defenseless. It has fought to suppress liberation movements in 20 countries, and it has attempted to murder countless leaders. Perhaps I hear some of you saying, that is enough. As the final solution of Gaza is broadcast live to millions, the small faces of its victims etched in bombed rubble, framed between TV commercials for cars and pizza. Yes, that is surely enough. How profane is that word? Enough. Afghanistan was where the West sent young men weighed down with the ritual of warriors to kill people and enjoy it. We know some of them enjoyed it from the evidence of Australian SAS sociopaths, including a photograph of them drinking from an Afghan man's prosthetic. Who do we hear this from, Care Bear? Not one sociopath has been charged for this, and crimes such as kicking a man over a cliff, gunning down children point blank, slitting throats, None of it in battle. David McBride, a former Australian military lawyer who served twice in Afghanistan, was a true believer in the system as moral and honorable. He also has an abiding belief in truth and loyalty. He can define them as few can. This coming week, he is in court in Canberra as an alleged criminal. An Australian whistleblower, reports Kieran Pender, a senior lawyer at the Australian Human Rights Law Centre, will face trial for blowing the whistle on horrendous wrongdoing. It is profoundly unjust that the first person on trial for war crimes in Afghanistan is the whistleblower and not an alleged war criminal. Funny that, Care Bear. This guy, David McBride.
Yeah.
We covered some of his stuff before, but I wanted to give kind of an overview for people who don't know how this operated. So, former Australian military lawyer McBride, once a captain in Britain's Special Air Service, aka the SAS, has been charged over the alleged leak of documents to journalists containing evidence of war crimes committed in Afghanistan by Australia's special forces. Okay? So, McBride, 55, appeared in the Australian Capital Territory Magistrates Court last Thursday. This is a long time ago. Accused of leaks to Australian Broadcasting Corporation and Fairfax Media reports during 2014 to 2016. Okay? The charges relate in part to an ABC investigation published in 2017 called the Afghan Files. What does this sound like to you, Care Bear? Getting any parallels for another story we know?
Oh.
Like, I don't know,
Which
working
one?
Julian.
Yeah.
So this is like you start working for, like, I don't know, MSNBC, and then they publish all these documents, ones that you haven't thoroughly gone through and redacted all the important bits of, and then you're blamed for it and thrown under the bus. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Making sure we got that. So here it's the ABC, right? So the Afghan Files defense leak exposes deadly secrets of Australia's special forces. It provided some detail about long suppressed official investigations into alleged war crimes. Most of the documents, which the ABC did not release, reportedly covered at least 10 incidents between 2009 and 2013, which military investigators summarily cleared special forces soldiers of killing civilians, including children, or other war crimes. So this is direct depictions of war crimes that were committed that they covered up. Among the investigation's mentions were cases related to the death of a man and a 6-year-old child during a raid on his house and the killing of a detainee who was alone with a soldier. Again, there are others as part of this. Particularly, there's one about them cutting the hands off people. It gets pretty crazy. But any thoughts so far, Care Bear?
I mean, you know what? I'm gonna hold off for now because I want to see where this is going. But yes,
sure.
I do.
So McBride can receive a sentence of up to 100 years. 100-year sentence, Collin, for revealing the cover-up of the great crime of Afghanistan. He tried to exercise his legal right as a whistleblower under the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which the current Attorney General Mark Dreyfus says delivers on our promise to strengthen protection for public sector whistleblowers, right? Yet it is Dreyfus, a Labor minister, who signed off on the McBride trial following a punitive wait of 4 years and 8 months since his arrest at Sydney Airport, a wait that shredded his health and family. So, I wanted to go up. Where's it at? Public Interest Disclosure Act. Okay. So it essentially states that things have to be within the public interest. Okay. Right. Guess who gets to decide that?
Right. Not us.
You will get to it. So those who know David and know of his hideous injustice done to him fill his street in Bondi near the beach in Sydney to wave their encouragement to his good and decent man. To them and me, he is a hero. McBride was affronted by what he found in the files he was ordered to inspect. Here was evidence of crimes and their cover-up. He passed hundreds of secret documents to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and the Sydney Morning Herald. Police raided the ABC's offices in Sydney while reporters and producers watched shocked as their computers were confiscated by the federal police. Oh no! Not the computers! We would have never had this happen to us. Attorney General Dreyfus, self-declared liberal reformer and friend of whistleblowers, has the single power to stop the McBride trial. A Freedom of Information search of his actions in this direction reveals little at most and indifference. You can't run a fully fledged democracy and a colonial war. One aspires to decency, the other is a form of fascism, regardless of its pretensions. Mark the killing fields of Gaza, bombed to dust by apartheid Israel. It is no coincidence that in rich yet impoverished Britain, an inquiry is currently being held into the gunning down by British SAS soldiers of 80 Afghans, all civilians, including a couple in bed. The grotesque injustice meted out to David McBride is minted from the injustice consuming his compatriot, Julian Assange. Both are friends of Pilger. Whenever I see them, I am optimistic. You cheer me, I tell Julian as he raises a defiant fist at the end of our visiting period. You make me feel proud. I tell David at our favorite coffee shop in Sydney. Their bravery has allowed many of us who might despair to understand the real meaning of a resistance we all share if we want to prevent the conquest of us, our conscience, our self-respect. If we prefer freedom and decency to compliance and collusion, in this, we are all Spartacus. So, Spartacus was the rebellious leader of Rome's slaves in 71 to 73 BC. There is a thrilling moment in the Kirk Douglas movie Spartacus when the Romans call on Spartacus's men to identify their leader and so be pardoned. Instead, hundreds of his comrades stand and raise their fist in solidarity and shout, I am Spartacus. The rebellion is underway. Julian and David are Spartacus. The Palestinians are Spartacus. People who fill the streets with flags and principles and solidarity are Spartacus. We are all Spartacus if we want to be. So breaking news from Consortium, right after I pulled this article. So, defeat for David McBride, military whistleblower on trial in Canberra for leaking to media Australian military murders of unarmed Afghans. Judge rules against instructing jury of public interest defense, saying duty is only to follow orders, not to violate them in the public interest. Will not instruct jury that a soldier's oath to the sovereign includes serving the public interest. You hear that, Care Bear?
Yeah.
Okay, so I might need to read that again for people. Judge rules against instructing jury of that PI defense, saying duty is only to follow orders, not to violate them in public interest. He will not instruct that jury, so he's essentially saying that a soldier's oath to the sovereign includes serving the public interest, that's not what it includes. So they don't work for you, they work for us. I will instruct the jury that there is no aspect of duty that allows accused to act in the public interest contrary to a lawful order. The judge said outside courtroom during break, McBride told press, it looks like I will be convicted and will go to jail. His lawyers have asked to move case to appeal court now, hearing tomorrow with a judge on his application, unmentioned in the courtroom. The 39 murdered, unarmed Afghans.
Of course.
Thoughts?
I mean, Julian Assange. This is like almost to the like it's they don't deviate from the script at all.
No, no, they don't.
Yeah. It's sad though because this is happening to well, we see what's happening in Palestine, anyway, like journalists are being killed, trying to report the truth, or like the way to get the truth out there is restricted right now. And then we have Julian Assange in jail, now David McBride in jail. Anyone, even in independent media, I think with us, demonetized or suppressed. Yeah, I mean, and just behind the scenes, like I think it might be once or every other week where I kind of vent to you.
Yeah.
And like, why in the hell am I doing this? Why are we doing this? Like, is it really a point for us being in independent media, only to get, I wouldn't say the ridicule, but, like we're suppressed, so no one doesn't watch us necessarily. Like, we don't have a big audience, but we're thankful to the audience that we do have, because as you say, I think we're cultivating an audience that really wants to learn things in a deeper way rather than, and in a superficial way. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but we want to try and bring stuff that no one else is really talking about and kind of give a little more meat to a lot of the issues that maybe our colleagues might talk about. But we're not necessarily recognizing that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that kind of translates into what's higher. Like, I wouldn't call them our colleagues, but definitely like the people that I think in a lot of ways that independent media exists to model after these people. I think at least in theory, this is what is happening to them. And
this is
I think
precedent setting.
Me,
essentially.
they've set the precedent, and and like essentially they're being tortured for. And we're also not in the same way. We're kind of being tortured for it because. So yeah, it's just hard, and it's kind of like, why bother? But like, and I was kind of reminded, like again with Nuno, who we reported on last segment, of him doing this podcast and him being a little like, I'm not sure if I do this or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was telling him, like, look, the reality is you of Arab descent and having that access to Europe and having access, and you understand the world, like, you're a model. So he's traveled quite a bit. So he has an understanding of the world that most people probably in that region of the world would not have, but to able to kind of put that place in terms of Western thinking, that's needed.
Yeah.
But that also kind of reminds me of what people said to me before I get into the space, is that your voice is needed because you have a perspective that needs to be shared. And so I think in a lot of ways, that's what encourages me to keep going, because it's not about the fame, it's not about the clicks, whatever, at least it shouldn't be. It's about exposing the truth and doing our part to expose the truth, especially if it's situations that affect us personally. And but so I think, for me, the idea of quitting, and it's I will admit it's tempting, because every week it's just almost kind of like, fuck it, I'm done.
More
like,
negativity and depression.
The show ends. Like, but it's but these are the people that we should be modeling ourselves after, that they're willing to die, honestly, literally, like, in order.
Well, it's not, they have no other choice in the matter, really.
Right, but I feel like in order to do, and like, yeah, I mean, we see a lot of journalists
Yes.
that sell out because they care more about their self-preservation versus the truth.
Yeah.
And we're seeing people like Assange, and we're seeing people like McBride, and we've seen others like, Vanessa Beeley and others who are willing to risk their lives to ensure that the truth is getting out there to whatever capacity that they're able to do, even to the point of death. And I think that's really, and I think we don't talk about that enough, especially independent media, is what you're willing to give up.
Yeah.
In terms of like, because if and we say this, if you're in it for the views or the clicks, then that's a red flag. At least for us, that's you're in it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But what's your story? What's your intent? And are you willing to give up essentially livelihood in order to make sure that the truth is getting out there? And
no, I agree.
Yeah.
Hopefully things change, but
but I think that's where we come in. It's I think the good thing, and I can argue the blessing of independent media, and I think especially for a lot of our colleagues who have been at this for so long, and especially like with Palestine, with this issue, it's been talked about in independent media for a relatively long time, I would argue. Like, I know, like, even when I started to get more acquainted with the space, even before I was in it doing this, shout out to Richie Medhurst, was talking about issues in the Middle East in a way that I never heard before or wasn't necessarily hearing, at the time. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, thanks to him and then others like him, like now when stuff is going down, especially with Israel and Hamas, people weren't necessarily buying. People were ready and were buying it. So I think it's just the idea of, and you kind of talk to me about this all the time. It's just being patient, but kind of sticking to your principles and keep continuing to, even if you're just a one issue person, but keep hammering that message over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually it will start making sense, especially if it's the truth. It will land at the right time. And
marathon shit.
Right. And I think even with David McBride, especially with what's happening with Assange, people are able to make this connection, I think, more readily because it's like, oh, shit, like similar situation. So what's really going on? So, I think it's just the idea of us really, truly doing the work that we set out to do. But I think asking ourselves, are we doing this with the purest of intent?
Right. Well, you ready for our next one?